The anime begins with Haruka, our edgelord, crouched behind a tree witnessing your family reunion, only to blow his cover by stepping on the smallest twig that is smaller than your peen. The goblin spotted him and gave chase, but Haruka smirked, confident in his abilities. As he leaped into the air, the goblins all stumbled into the trap he'd set. Pleased with himself, Haruka silently congratulated himself for surviving solo in another world. The scene shifts to the past, explaining how Haruka ended up in this situation. Born a natural loner, he never wanted anything to do with his classmates, finding them annoying and a distraction from what he loved most, reading. Back in his classroom, the social divisions were obvious. Big giant girls, delinquents, jocks, nerds, the class rep, and the rest. However, Haruka didn't belong to any of them, and he liked it that way. One day, a magic circle appeared in the middle of class. Haruka, being a fan of manga, recognized it but also remembered how annoying it would be to get stuck in another world. He hinted the idea of being surrounded by people. As panic ensued, he tried to make his escape, cleverly crawling into an air vent. But to his luck, the magic circle expanded, chasing him, and eventually he ended up in the typical white void. Haruka knew the drill from reading so much manga and wondered when the king and his unattainable daughter would show up. Instead, some frantic old guide who looked like a god beckoned him over. It turned out that Haruka's classmates had already been summoned to the new world, and he was the last to be teleported. Before his transfer, Haruka was allowed to pick his stats and skills. A giant menu then popped up with his options, but to his surprise, all the good skills were taken. He was left with useless ones like stick holding, good health, and walking. Browsing through the leftovers, he found titles like Shut-In and NEET, which only made him feel worse. Furious, Haruka demanded better options, but the old god, fed up, decided to dump all the remaining skills on him at once. So Haruka entered the new world with a pool of useless abilities and a bag that could hold an unlimited number of items. Checking his stats, Haruka was told to roll dice. Annoyed, he remembered this obscure skill and reluctantly rolled the dice, getting a double M. Not knowing what it meant, he assumed it stood for masochist, expecting the worst. However, his stat screen prompted him to allocate points, so he dumped everything into luck, thinking raw stats wouldn't help him survive with his lame skills. Then it hit him. M stood for max, and his luck stat was now maxed out. Surprised, Haruka noticed 2 extra skills among the sea of worthless ones. Apparently, because he was summoned alone, he received the loner title, which prevented him from joining any parties. He also gained his servitude skill, allowing him to command others, which was cool, but it meant his dreams of a harem were over. Haruka briefly wondered where his classmates were, but it didn't matter since he couldn't join forces with them anyway. Ready to start his adventure, he focused on finding a base of operations. In the forest, denser than your mom, he worried about encountering monsters. He searched for a useful skill, but only thought of one that allowed him to doze off. While sorting through his items, he tried on some contact lenses, which surprisingly gave him the appraisal skill. This helped him find edible mushrooms that boosted his abilities. With his bottomless bag, he grabbed as many as he could, apologizing to the bag for initially thinking it was useless. After drinking some water, he heard a noise in the distance. Following the sound, he discovered a cave. Praying he wouldn't run into any monsters, Haruka decided to make it his base. With his camping gear and temperature magic, he lit a small fire and realized that his supposedly useless leftover skills were turning out to be more helpful than he thought. Haruka checks his stats again and is surprised to see his temperature magic has leveled up, unlocking fire magic. This could be helpful, but he still worries about how he'll handle a monster if one shows up, since right now his only weapon is a stick. Despite these concerns, he ends up falling asleep without a care. The next morning, Haruka wakes to find everything is fine. His items repel monsters, and his shut-in title creates a protective barrier around his base. Now that he has fire magic, starting a fire is much easier, so he cooks himself some breakfast. He uses the beef jerky from his bag and the mushrooms he found the day before. The meal is surprisingly delicious, and Haruka feels grateful for his villager starter bag, though he thinks it's more of a survivalist's kit. Determined to gather more food, Haruka heads out but knows his top priority is figuring out how to protect himself from monsters. Unfortunately, his worst fear comes true when he encounters 2 goblins. Though they're small fry monsters, their stats are higher than he expected. Haruka doubts he can win but realizes he has no choice. Eventually, he'll have to learn how to fight monsters. His stick seems inadequate, but he remembers he has a skill called wrapping, which lets him enhance objects with magic. This makes his stick stronger, and Haruka becomes determined to survive even without any cheat skills. Haruka launches his first ever attack, taking the first goblin by surprise and brutally beating it down. The second goblin tries to strike, but its moves are clumsy, and Haruka dodges with ease. During the fight, he instinctively taps into a new power and eliminates the second goblin. Afterward, he feels proud of his victory and heads back to his base, bringing one of the goblin's clubs with him. However, after comparing it with his enhanced stick, he decides to stick with what he has. Upon checking his stats, Haruka is thrilled to see that he leveled up and his stats have more than doubled. His cane mastery leveled up as well, which confuses him since all he did was swing the stick a few times. He also gained magic infusion, likely from enchanting his stick, and even his calisthenics skill improved, which he jokingly attributes to his habit of never skipping morning exercises. Later, Haruka gets tired of eating mushrooms and longs for meat, but knows the class rep would scold him for being ungrateful. After finishing his meal, he tries out magic infusion on himself, enhancing his physical and magical defenses. His appraisal skill also levels up, but it's still showing question marks on most of his items, which he finds odd. Deciding not to overthink it, he heads back out. While wandering the forest, Haruka feels blessed to find something, but it's just another mushroom. He's tempted to search for meat other than the one below, but reminds himself to practice his magic instead. His enhanced body now feels so light, it's almost like teleporting, and his dexterity has skyrocketed as well. He encounters a more powerful goblin and defeats it easily, gaining enough confidence to believe he could take on a group of 3. However, when he actually runs into such a group, his cowardice kicks in, and he decides to avoid more fighting for the day. By day 5, Haruka manages to defeat a goblin in a single strike and decorates his base with some fancy creations he made using magic. Pleased with how well this new life is shaping up, Haruka feels a sense of accomplishment. That night, while chasing a meaty rabbit, Haruka senses something unusual. To his dismay, it's his classmates. To make it worse, the ones approaching are the delinquents. Not wanting to get involved, Haruka checks the other direction using his clairvoyant skill and is horrified to see the big giant baddies. The jocks are also nearby, and though the nerds are close too, Haruka would rather not interact with them either. That leaves the class rep and her group. Haruka has known the class rep since grade school, and though it would be smart to make allies in this dangerous world, he stops himself. But in this moment of reflection, Haruka realizes how free and independent he feels, living on his own terms without anyone interfering. He values this newfound freedom more than anything and makes his final decision. They'll conquer this world alone without relying on anyone else, fitting for our true edgelord. This then marks the end of today's anime recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach our current goal of 20,000 subscribers.